In this video, I want to give you a quick start guide for all new users who want to use EndeavourOS their first time. I show you all the important steps from the installation until your first steps under EndeavourOS. I personally would recommend you. We start from the EndeavourOS website, and you can download the latest EndeavourOS version from the EndeavourOS website. I put you the link into the video description. You could whether start a download via a torrent file, this is also very easy, but otherwise you can head down here and download from your current country the ISO file, and then you are just fine. The ISO file you put on a USB stick via, for example, Berliner Etcher or Rufus or another Linux tool, that's very fine. And from there you can restart your computer and start from your USB stick. And this is where this video really starts. Here we have our EndeavourOS boot menu for the very first time if we boot from our USB stick, and we have these different options. We have EndeavourOS default, EndeavourOS NVIDIA, and EndeavourOS fallback. Normally I would recommend the default one. Otherwise, if you have an NVIDIA graphics card, then this EndeavourOS NVIDIA is recommended. And if something doesn't work with the default, just try it with the fallback. But I'm going with the default here. After some time, if everything is right, we see our EndeavourOS version here and a welcome screen. At first, I highly recommend you to connect you with your internet if you didn't have already. You can do this on the right bottom corner here. Please keep in mind that the current keyboard which is activated will be the US keyboard by default. I'm already connected via cable. Then we go to the welcome screen and we select start the installer. And then we can choose the installation method. As I mentioned, if you are connected to the internet, I highly recommend you the online method, because then we can also choose some other desktops if we want to. After some time, we get our question with which language we want to continue. I'm choosing British English here and then select next in my case. Then you can define your time zone. In my case, the time zone is the correct one, so I go next here, and then we can choose our keyboard layout. For me, English UK is also fine. I go next, and then we can choose our desktop. And you see there are plenty options here. For example, the Plasma KDE desktop. This is this desktop, which already comes also with this ISO file. But honestly, in my tests, EndeavourOS with Plasma KDE didn't work as good as expected, to be honest. So I'm personally not a big KDE fan. If you are already familiar to the Plasma KDE desktop, then this is completely fine. Otherwise, if you didn't use KDE yet, I would recommend you another desktop. But of course, you are completely free to choose whatever you want. We have, for example, the GNOME desktop, which is the very simplistic and very modern desktop. We have XFCE, which is also simplistic but also very performant. Cinnamon is in between of them, and then we have Mate, which is an old GNOME 2 implementation. I personally would not recommend you this. Also no Budgie desktop, because this isn't too well spreaded into the Linux world. LXQt could be very fine for some old computers, for example. Then you have LXDE, which is outdated in my opinion. I wouldn't recommend you this. And then in the end we have i3WM. I already did a video about i3. Please choose i3 Desktop Manager only if you already know it. Which desktop do I recommend you for a first start? And I would go with Cinnamon, because it is very familiar to many users and it just works and has a great set of applications and is also very modern in my opinion. So Cinnamon is my option here. I go to next, and then we see our packages we want to install. I personally wouldn't recommend you to deselect some of these. I would recommend to choose the printing support already, and if you have HP printer or scanners, I also highly recommend you to select this thing. You could also install LTS kernels in addition, honestly, you won't need this normally, so you could leave this blank. Choose next, and in the next thing we are choosing if we want to install the grub bootloader. Normally you want to do that, so just keep this activated and then head next. Only choose no bootloader if you already have some other Linux distributions on your system and you want these other Linux distributions bootloader handle the EndeavourOS installation. If we go next, then we have our partition center. Here we can choose our partitioning. In my case, this is a test machine and I don't have anything yet there, so I could choose erase disk and then I could choose swap to file. This is what I personally recommend, and I personally recommend you btrfs for EndeavourOS. I'm normally an ext4 guy, but I would say btrfs for Arch-based distributions is just fine. Otherwise, you could also choose the manual partitioning, and then we create a new partition table if there isn't anything yet on your hard disk. So I create a new partition table and I'm going with an MBR in this case. If you are installing this onto a real system, then you should choose the GUID partition table, but I'm going with the master boot record here because this is my test system and I'm not booted in EFI mode. If you want more details about partitioning and more details about when to use an EFI partition, when to use some GPT, when to use MBR and so on, I put you the link to my last video into the description. There I discussed many cases of this, but I'm going with an MBR partition here. In my case, normally you don't want to create a new partition table because this means formatting your whole disk. And then I go to the free space here and then select create, and then I select the file system type, which is btrfs in my case. And then as a mount point, I choose the slash here. This is the root file system. I hit OK here. Then I go to next here. Then I personally get a message option to use GPT on BIOS. I'm not doing this GPT on BIOS system. Then I can type my name. This is Jean in my case, and I'm calling this EndeavourOS. Perfect. Then I'm choosing a password and I'm choosing use the same password for the administrator account, so I can very easily use sudo, but otherwise you could also choose a different password for an additional administrator account. And then I hit next. Now in the end we see all things which would be done. I go to install and then I go install now. And this now takes some minutes. After some time, EndeavourOS installation has been finished, so I can select restart now and done. Now, while the computer is rebooting, it is very important that you put out your USB stick. Otherwise, the grub from the boot menu will reappear, so just make sure your computer now starts from your hard disk and not from your USB stick. And if you have done everything right, this is how your boot menu will look like. We start just with EndeavourOS Linux here. After our computer has been restarted, we see our welcome screen. But at first, we want to ensure our computer is up to date. We can do this with our welcome screen here, or we can just issue our very first terminal command on EndeavourOS. So I open up a terminal and I type in sudo pacman. I make it a bit bigger for you here. Then -syu. And this stands for a full system update. So I type enter, then type in my password and enter again. And then there is everything synchronized and updated. We see one update. I say yes, proceed with installation. So Y and yes. And then this package will be updated. Maybe other packages are also updated. So this command you could issue very regular to get a latest update. Otherwise, if you are also using the AUR later, we will come to that point later, then you can issue instead sudo yay -big S yu and then type in enter, and then also the AUR updates are performed. So if you're using the AUR later, we will come to that point, then just substitute pacman with yay. Now let's come to the welcome screen here. We see our after installation screen. We can at first update our mirrors for Arch and EndeavourOS. So if you want another mirror, you could select another mirror here. For example, yes, I'm personally in Ireland. There is no Irish server, so I would choose UK here and then select OK. And then the Arch mirror list will be generated. This is very fine. We see here some United Kingdom servers. I select save and then type in my password and then authenticate. Otherwise, we will do also the same for the EndeavourOS mirrors. So I go to this terminal here and we see some rankings which are now running. This takes a moment. So after some time, I write in my password and then type enter again and then enter again. Then we have updated our mirrors. This is completely fine if you only do this once after installation. And if you are not doing this, then also everything is fine. Then maybe your downloads may be a bit slower, but this will also be okay. Then we have some update buttons, update native packages and AUR packages. There's also another tool called EOS update. But of course also with our yay package manager, but we just did this in the very last moment. But if you want, we could very easily click this update native and AUR packages, and then this is going with yay. So if you want it graphically, this is how you do it. And yeah, in the end, we see there's nothing to do. I press enter and then this is fine. So if you don't want to issue a terminal command, then this is also very easy. Then we see a package cleanup configuration. So when should be the package cache be erased or deleted? We can change the cleaning period here. This is completely fine if we keep it here for weekly and the 3 latest package versions to keep. Maybe you could lower this to 2 or even 1. But I would say the default settings are just fine here, to be honest. I type in my password again and press enter again. Also, if you are using multiple desktops, for example, or you want to change your login screen for some time, so this is the display manager, you could do this here. In our Cinnamon version, we are using LightDM. This is completely fine. And this is a kind of fail-safe option. If you are using GNOME, then this should be GDM. If you're using KDE Plasma, then this should be SDDM. But LightDM in my case is completely fine. Also, normally you don't want to do this, so this shouldn't be changed here unless you really, really want it. Otherwise, we could change the display resolution here. Very easy, very handy. I just selected my right resolutions. We could also select another EndeavourOS default wallpaper, but this is just fine. We could also download even more wallpapers. This is called then community wallpapers, as you see. But with that, we have finished our after installation agenda. There are some general info like the wiki. This is very, very helpful in my opinion. So just have a brief look on it. There are many different wiki articles which are very helpful. For example, ButterFS, Bluetooth, dev environments, also the EndeavourOS tools. So if you want to get more detailed with your Linux distribution and if you want to learn something, then this wiki is really, really great. I highly recommend you. This is with our after installation. Then we have our assistant screen in our welcome screen. This is for updating things and also for some logs. And for example, our Cinnamon information we see here, okay. Then we get our Arch Linux wiki article. This is just fine. And then we got some tips here, also very helpful. But these are only links in our wiki because there are also some video tutorials which might come in handy. Otherwise, we have also an add more apps thing. This is very helpful, but we will come there to a very short moment because our community download wallpaper script here asks for a root password. So I type in my normal password. Now we could choose one of the EndeavourOS wallpapers here with this script. For example, I personally go with the launch sunset image here. I select OK, and then we are getting this sunset thing here, which is very dark but Personally, I like that very much. But we have been here in add more apps. This is what we want. And this is our next point. We could choose popular apps to install very, very easily. We could just click on this here, and then we get a quick start installer for EndeavourOS. This is very perfect for our quick start video here, of course. So you could choose which audio player, for example, you want to install. I personally highly recommend Audacious, for example. As a browser, you could also choose some other browsers. The Firefox is already installed, as you see it here. I personally go with Chromium, and then in communications you could, for example, install Telegram desktop if you want. I personally don't do this here. As development tools, for example, the Code or Visual Studio Code cross-platform IDE is perfect. If you want to code for email, just go with Thunderbird if you want. Image processing and editing, this depends on you. A very good Photoshop alternative is GIMP, for example, but also for very quick image manipulation and simple drawing, Pinter is also great, so I go with Pinter also. And then as image viewers, we could select another image viewer, but we already have an image viewer installed. If you want to organize many photos and photo albums, then Shotwell will be great. And otherwise we go to math. Yeah, we could install a calculator. Don't we have a calculator installed? We have glculator installed, so this is just fine, okay. MISC system tools, there are also some. You may want to install Flatpak because this is the so-called Linux App Store, I call it sometimes. So this could be very helpful if you want to. What is also very helpful is gparted, for example, for partitioning. And if you want to analyze your disk usage, then baobab is very great. When it comes to Office, we could install, for example, LibreOffice Fresh or LibreOffice Still. To be honest, the LibreOffice Still branch is just fine, but hey, we are on EndeavourOS. We take the Fresh here because, of course, we are all fresh. So PDF reader, Xreader is a very great PDF reader. Personal finance, I guess this is all fine. I don't need this in this case. Personal security, I highly recommend you to choose KeePassXC as a password manager. I will also do a separate video about this one at a time. For text editors, you see some text editors for selection. Just go with your text editor you want to. I used XCD for a very long time, and this was a great text editor, to be honest. And if you want a more basic one, then Mousepad is also just fine. But XCD here as a default in Cinnamon is very, very nice. We could install some torrent clients, maybe if you want transmission GTK, but this depends on you. I'm not installing here anything. And then we could install a video player. I choose the VLC player here. Now I selected all my software I want to install and I hit install. Now I type in my password and then I go authenticate, and then we see, oh, target not found, Pinter, not good. So maybe we won't go with Pinter then. I reselect everything and then without Pinter. Now, after I didn't select Pinter and reselected all my other packages again, as I mentioned, then I can proceed with the installation, and then the installation takes place. And if you already used another Linux distribution, or if you don't use an Arch-based Linux distribution before, then you will see this installation of so many apps is very, very fast in the end, because it's downloading everything in parallel, for example, and also the installation is much more performant than compared to apt, for example. I press enter to resume, and then we have installed these things. And if I go to the menu and I'm looking for LibreOffice, for example, we see our complete LibreOffice suite, GIMP also, of course, or our disk usage analyzer called baobab, for example. But this is just fine. This is very easy with essential software. Of course, you could also browse through all other packages, for example, in the AUR. Yay is just pre-installed, as we mentioned it before. This is the Flatpak version, kind of Arch Linux, but there might be also some apps which are only in the FlatHub and not in the AUR, then just choose this. For example, I'm searching for Linux Assistant. Here we have it, Linux Assistant bin. I want to install this, so I personally go with my terminal and select yay -big S, and then I type in Linux Assistant. assistant bin. Then I install this one. I don't want to clean build anything here. I type in enter again, and then this is doing everything. Nice. I type in my password and type in enter, and then everything is installing. And then I press enter again, and then everything's fine. Okay. And now if I go to the menu and search for Linux Assistant is installed, and here we see the Linux Assistant app. Isn't this cool? And to be honest, if you know me, you already know it. This is the app I developed by myself. So this is my own app, and I just got notice that someone put it in the AUR, very easily installable for all Arch distributions. And to be honest, this is my very first try, and it just works. Very, very nice to see my own application packaged from other people in the AUR now. Very, very cool. Thank you very much, dear maintainer. And yeah, Linux Assistant is a daily helper, completely free and open source, of course, which also has some first installation steps, for example, and so on. If you want to get all features, just have a look to the feature overview. There are many features you could choose here, but yeah, this is just fine. And also, of course, has a very great search. Just search for anything, and then you will find anything you want to do. And this is very great. But yeah, this is it to Linux Assistant. Very cool to see this app here living in the AUR now. Okay, so this is it for our software installation. Let's come to other things we might to set up properly, and this is Timeshift. Timeshift could be very handy, especially if you use ButterFS, because this is a system snapshot system, and I want to show you how it works. So I personally close this welcome screen. I select don't show me anymore, and if you want to enable it, you could run the command eos welcome -- enable, for example. I select I remember, but of course you could choose the welcome screen again from your menu to open this one up. So everything's fine here. For me, I'm going now with Timeshift. So from now on, we have two different options. As a first option, we could very easily install it via pacman here -big S and then a Timeshift. But of course, we could also go with a Linux Assistant, for example, and just also search for Timeshift, because this thing can also search for packages. Here we see it, install Timeshift via pacman very easily. Okay, this is my last notice about Linux Assistant. It also has some more great functionality. Just have a look at it if you want it. I'm going with pacman -s Timeshift, and of course I want to do this as a root user here, and then I type in my password again, and we install this Timeshift. Afterwards, you see it is blazingly fast, very quick. I open up Timeshift here in my menu, I type in my password, and then we select the snapshot type. We want to choose the ButterFS snapshot type. I hit next here, and then I select my snapshot location. We want to choose the very same location where our EndeavourOS is installed, so just keep it as it is in this case. Then we select next, and then we can choose our snapshot level, and I would say daily 5 is completely fine for EndeavourOS, and I hit next. And then we could also include some home subvolumes and backups. I personally won't recommend you this, because if you want to roll back to a specific snapshot of your system, you don't want to roll back your data also. So this is only for the system. If you want to do backups of your personal files, then choose, for example, pk backup. This is a great tool. Timeshift is only for the system. So I hit next here, and then finish, and then we have Timeshift set up, and it's doing our snapshots very easily with ButterFS, which is way more efficient than ext4 when it comes to snapshot. Okay. Of course, you could also use, for example, Snapper if you are kind of an advanced user, but for the first thing, Timeshift is completely enough and does its job very, very good. So whenever your system won't boot again, for example, you could boot up a live system, could install Timeshift on this, or just go with a pre-installed live system with Timeshift, and then you can set back your system to an earlier date where specific software maybe were not installed at this point. This is it for our Timeshift. As a next point, you may want to install some microcode updates for your processor, and this depends on which processor you currently have. So if I go to my system information, for example, we see our processor. I do have an Intel processor, so I'm going with the intel-ucode. Otherwise, if you have an AMD processor, you go with the amd-ucode. What we can do here is typing in sudo pacman-big S and then intel-ucode for Intel systems, and otherwise you type in amd-ucode. Okay, I'm going with intel-ucode. I type in enter again, and then this is being inserted into the kernel. This is very recommended for CPU stability and also performance, so just make sure to don't miss this out. We also see now a notification, reboot recommended. We will do this in a later point of time, but yeah, just reboot your system before you are using it in production from now on. As the next point, we also may want to save our battery life, for example, or we want to control how much power our system should use right now if we want to use a performance mode or a power saving mode. And we could do this with a very easy app, and this is called power-profiles-daemon, it is called. Very easy. Just a side notice, if we open up Linux Assistant, we could search for power mode, and here we have our power mode, and this also installs us our power-profiles-daemon. I type in enter, and then this should be installed. Nice, perfect. I hit next, and then I can choose between the power saving mode and the balanced mode inside here, but also on real systems, which is not a test system or a virtual machine, you could also choose a performance mode. Very, very nice, very easy. So just keep an eye to that. But of course you could do this also in the terminal. So very easy, just type in power profiles control. Then we see our current power profile here with the star, which is currently balanced. I could do this with power profiles control set, and then I choose a power saver here, I type enter, and then I'm in the power saver mode. And this also makes a real difference. I highly recommend you this if you want to use it. As a next point, we might want to enable and install Bluetooth components. This is very easy in EndeavourOS. For that, I open up a terminal, and at first we need to install some components. And I'm going with sudo pacman and then -s, and then we go with bluez, then with bluez-utils like this. And then we want a graphical manager. I personally go with blueman. This is very good and the most major, I would say. These things we are installing, I type in my password, and then I type in enter, and it will run here. Then we have to enable the Bluetooth service. So I go with sudo systemctl enable, and then we go with Bluetooth. This is it. After a restart, Bluetooth will work quite fine with EndeavourOS, and for this we have then our Bluetooth manager installed. This is it for Bluetooth, and let's go with another point, multimedia codecs and fonts. For that, I open up my terminal again, and we type in sudo pacman-s gst-plugins-good, gst-plugins-bad, and the gst-plugins-ugly. Yes, these are different multimedia codecs you might want to use and you might want to install, because then you could play almost every audio and video file. And also I want to recommend you to install some emoji package for better emoji support. If your web browser wants to display, for example, something, that this works really good also in some other applications. So with this I go with noto-fonts and then emoji. like this. I am typing in my password and press enter, and then this is being installed. Our next point, we could configure our swappiness on EndeavourOS that the swap handling is a bit better. Let's also have a look how our swap is used right now. We could see this very easily with free-m, and then we see, okay, we have a swap file of only 511 megabytes. This isn't too much, to be honest. So we might create a bigger swap file, and we also want to check our swappiness. This is on 60 by default. The swappiness defines when to put something from our memory into our disk, that our memory has a bit more space again for some new applications, for example, we want to run now. And this could be very handy, especially if you don't have too much memory, as for example, I do have. I'm only having about 4 gigabytes of RAM. So for that, let us configure our swappiness and enlarge our swap file. I would say we go with the swappiness at first. I create a new file in sysctl.d and I call it, for example, 99-swappiness.conf. I type in enter and then I call it vm.swappiness equals 10, and then I type in Ctrl-O, enter, Ctrl-X, and then everything's fine. If you want to use a graphical editor, you could, for example, also use the XED editor here in EndeavourOS Cinnamon, and then you could also edit this text file here, but this is completely fine. Nano is your way to go, and maybe if you even know Vim, then go with Vim, I guess. But yeah, now we want to create a new swap file. So I type in the command sudo swapoff/swap/swapfile, and I type enter, and then I type in a new command to enlarge our swap file for sudo fallocate-l and then /swap/swapfile. But of course I want to put some size in here after the -l, and I'm going with 4 gigabytes of swap here now. So I type in 4 and a big G, and then I type in enter. Nice, this is very easy. And then I say sudo chmod 600/swap/swapfile. Then we set the right file permissions, and then I type in sudo mk-swap and then /swap/swapfile. Nice, I do this. Okay, perfect. This warning for now is completely okay for us. Nice, and then I could do sudo swap/swap/swapfile. And now our swap is back again. And if I type in free-m now, then we see our swap is about 4 gigabytes large. This is very good. And on bigger systems, you might want to use a swap for 16 gigabytes or maybe 32 gigabytes. If you're using many virtual machines and something like this, this might be handy. But yeah, 4 gigabytes is completely fine for our normal EndeavourOS system here we are using. Okay, this is it for our swappiness and our swap file. And this is it I wanted to show you today with EndeavourOS. We now set up everything I wanted to show you. So in the end, let us just restart our EndeavourOS here, and then let's have a look onto our finished system in the end. We come to our login screen, I log in ourselves in here, and then we are back again with our EndeavourOS Cinnamon, and this looks quite cool now. We have plenty of applications installed, everything up to date. Also Timeshift is working. We have great apps like, for example, our code editor, LibreOffice, the VLC player, for example, Audacious for music listening, and in overall a great EndeavourOS setup I want to use right now on my laptop, for example. And this is how you could restart with EndeavourOS. So in the end, if you found this video helpful, please leave a like and subscribe to LinuxOrt, because we are releasing new stuff about Linux and open source every week. And if you have even more tips for EndeavourOS beginners or experienced EndeavourOS users, just write at me into the comments, because I would also be very curious about this. Thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next one. Bye!